Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving deep into one of the most fascinating chapters of Antonio Gramsci's thought, the idea of the modern prince and his theory of revolutionary strategy through the war of position and the war of maneuver. In this video, we'll explore how Gramsci drew on the ideas and legacy of thinkers like Machiavelli and Lenin to redefine the political party, not just as an instrument of power, but as a crucial force capable of reshaping society from the ground up. We'll break down what Gramsci meant by the modern prince, how he understood the role of the state, and why he believed that genuine revolution requires more than just street uprisings. It demands a long, strategic battle for cultural and ideological dominance. So, whether you're curious about Marxist theory, political transformation, or just trying to make sense of the forces shaping our world today, stick around, because what Gramsci laid out in his prison notebooks might just be more relevant now than ever. So, let's get into it. The Modern Prince, War of Position, and War of Maneuver. The Modern Prince. Introduction. In his quest for revolutionary change, Gramsci sought inspiration in the works of previous philosophers. One of his inspirations was Italian philosopher Benedetto Croce, who, in his work Etica e Politica, took great inspiration from the work The Prince by Niccolò Machiavelli. Croce was not the only Italian philosopher of the time who was greatly inspired by the works of Machiavelli. Others include philosophers such as Gaetano Mosca and Vilfredo Pareto. Similarly, Gramsci, who shared a strong Marxist distrust of conventional political categories, found this method appealing. Parallels between Gramsci and Croce can be easily observed. Both philosophers argued that consent and force were interwoven elements of power dynamics, disputing the notion that they were mutually incompatible. Both contended that there could be no consent without coercion, and that liberty was inextricably linked to authority. Statulatory. In his philosophical endeavors, Gramsci faced a conundrum. What if the civil society lacked the power to assess the state? What if the vast majority of the population was either uninformed of what was best for them or unsure about how to accomplish it? In such circumstance, Gramsci thought that it might be necessary for the state to temporarily control society's destiny in order to make it accept its ethical content. In this instance, Gramsci's adherence to Leninist ideas shows. He underlined the importance of those driving economic transformation to lead the state rather than relying on the civil society to adapt through persuasion and propaganda. Gramsci's position became clear when he declared, quote, "The state is the instrument for conforming civil society to the economic structure, but it is necessary for the state to be willing to do this, i.e., for the representatives of the change that has taken place in the economic structure to be in the control of the state." End of quote. Gramsci's viewpoint was a direct response to the moderate socialists who, in 1917, questioned the Russian people's readiness for socialism. Gramsci claimed that the purpose of the vanguard was to prepare them, with socialist leaders outperforming those in the capitalist stage of growth in preparing the working classes for a new economic base of society. A critical examination of Gramsci's critique of liberal and fascist regimes, as well as his support for a socialist state, exposes a seeming logical contradiction, which is characteristic of his prison works. Scholars have offered many explanations of this conflict. It seems like Gramsci's major focus appears to have been the game's outcome, rather than the fascist style of play. He saw statutory as more than just a reactionary phenomenon, having the potential to spark and maintain revolution. Gramsci recognized that in certain historical settings, dictatorship may be the only way to attain and maintain hegemony, even if it requires a strong state. However, he warned against falling into theoretical fanaticism, instead advocating for a criticism to stimulate the creation of alternative types of statehood and its eventual self-annihilation. In his works, he claimed that only a social group seeking the abolition of both the state and itself could eventually establish an ethical state. Machiavellian influence. Gramsci, similarly to Lenin, accepted that the working class people have a different level of consciousness and commitment to the revolutionary cause. In his essays on Machiavelli, Gramsci claimed that politics must be treated as an autonomous science, an issue he saw as fundamental. Gramsci also rejected the concept of spontaneous political action as harmful and called for intentional investigation, analysis, preparation, and timeliness in achieving power. Gramsci, inspired by Machiavelli, investigated the relationship between the governing and the ruled, emphasizing the importance of myth and ideology in developing opposition to ruling parties. This notion became central to Gramsci's political and cultural theories, in which he recognized the importance of ideological apparatuses, particularly national and popular culture, in organizing counter-hegemonic actions. Gramsci's conception of the prince differs greatly from that of fascist Caesarism or even that of Machiavelli himself. He sees the new prince as a political movement or party seeking to build a new state. This contrasts with the conventional party, which is made up of elite cultural personalities who provide leadership, while the majority provides general support. According to Gramsci, the new prince must develop cultural and political ideas on a state and civic level in order to successfully bring about a new counter-hegemony. The modern prince or party. Gramsci views a party as consisting of three components: a mass element, usually regular people or workers, a cohesive element, the leading vanguard, and an intermediate element, traditional or organic intellectuals. This leads us to the essence of Gramsci's ideas: the connection of politics and culture. Traditional intellectuals serve as middlemen between ruling parties, whereas subaltern factions must nurture their own intellectuals in order to create power bases. Gramsci's emphasis on intellectuals' role in legitimizing power or establishing new power relations is crucial. For Gramsci, the proletariat's acquisition of power must be accompanied by the assertion of hegemony. This viewpoint is obvious in Gramsci's discussion of revolutionary tactics, in which he does not regard the masses as simple material to be shaped by the enlightened elite. His conviction in the working class's creative power distinguishes him from other political theoreticians, emphasizing the significance of understanding and realizing their potential. Gramsci's emphasis on the relationship between social groups, intellectual growth, and societal function is summed up in his argument that every social group anchored in economic production spontaneously generates organic intellectual groupings. These intellectuals symbolize the group's critical self-awareness, which has shaped historical materialism into a transformational social force. Gramsci sees the intellectual's role as bridging the gap between popular masses and intellectual circles, teaching the masses with a canon that draws on popular radicalism. Furthermore, Gramsci presents the notion of regulated order as a means of creating a shared culture for the emerging society. While conceding Lenin's uncertainties, he emphasizes the emancipation of the mind and the supremacy of intelligence in his vision of socialism. Gramsci's focus on consciousness, the creative function of the intellect, and his libertarian viewpoints placed him apart from other Marxists. His works reveal a comprehensive knowledge of the causes and preoccupations that influenced his reasoning, providing insight into his innermost thoughts. In essence, Gramsci's theories, with their multiple layers and crossings, offer an unique insight into the intricacies of political and cultural transition. His investigation of the interaction between power, intellectuals, and the public provides a long-term insight into the mechanics of society's development. War of position and war of maneuver. Antonio Gramsci delineated two distinct stages in the conflict between social classes: the war of maneuver and the war of position. The war of maneuver refers to a confrontational situation when different social groups engage in direct conflicts, and the final result is decided by the fights between revolutionaries and the state. The war of position refers to a protracted and covert struggle with the objective of acquiring influence and authority. In order to achieve a victory, it is imperative to have a socialist ideology that resonates with the working class. The war of maneuver refers to the conflict of power, which includes any overt conflict between social classes, extending beyond revolutionary or counter-revolutionary battles. In his strategic considerations, Gramsci strongly recommended against any type of arritismo or armed adventurism, finding it unfit for the proletariat and likely to elicit reactionary responses. He stressed the importance of politics above military action, claiming that only politics create the possibility of maneuver and movement. Gramsci also realized that revolutions are more viable to plot under liberal democratic governments than under totalitarian regimes determined to limit political participation, an understanding he honed during his incarceration in 1926. Gramsci challenged workers not just to complain about their superiors, but to outperform them morally and technically. He sharply chastised left-wing intellectuals who justified the moral flaws that are frequently associated with the unprivileged, differentiating between revolutionary activity and criminal behavior. Gramsci rejected the deterministic justification that the environment justified such behavior, arguing that in order to achieve change, people and organizations must aim for a higher standard of behavior than the present system. Gramsci, far from romanticizing the oppressed, provided a practical appraisal of subordinate populations. He recognized their disorganized and unpredictable resistance, which was frequently disrupted by dominating forces, while acknowledging the inclination for solidarity among these groupings. He emphasized the limitations created by external influences. Gramsci highlighted a critical time in the trajectory of social transformation, a battle for class hegemony to seize control of the governmental institutions and restructure the political system. This entails forming an economic compromise or alliance that brings subordinate and emerging dominant groups together under the control of the latter. Gramsci also explored the notion of ideology, describing it as a battleground in which two hegemonic principles compete for dominance. Gramsci believed that ideology actively shapes individuals' conduct in accordance with the economic ideologies. He stressed ideology's significance in structuring people and defining the ground of conflict. Gramsci maintained that a social group must become directive before gaining governmental authority, which is necessary for a successful administration. Even after establishing hegemony, this group must remain directive and preserve its leadership position. Gramsci claimed that power cannot be transferred until the proletariat's new moral hegemony moves from potential to actuality. Thanks so much for sticking with me through this deep dive into Gramsci's ideas of the modern prince, the war of position, and the war of maneuver. As you've seen, these aren't just abstract concepts, they are tools for understanding real historical dynamics, power structures, and revolutionary change. In the next and final chapter of this series, I'll be doing something a little different. I'll be applying Gramsci's philosophy in my own way, moving beyond traditional interpretations. We'll take a closer look at interstate relations in the 20th century Central Europe and examine how Gramsci's ideas of hegemony and coercion can help us better understand the shifting balance of power between states, especially under Nazi and Soviet influence. This upcoming episode won't be a history lesson, rather, it is a philosophical application of Gramsci's theory to a broad, commonly accepted narrative of 20th century events. It's about how states, like classes, build and lose hegemony over others, and what happens when the hegemony breaks down. So, if you are interested in rethinking history through a Gramscian lens, make sure you're subscribed. And, as always, feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how you interpret these ideas. See you in the next one.